I'm Steve Jones from Newsmag Renfrew. I'm here today to talk to you about Tommy Tuberville. I believe I had that pronounced correctly. Anyways, he is the Republican senator from Alabama, and he's in the news, and the fact that he's in the news at all is really what the story should be all about. But Tommy has found a little niche for himself, and he's applying it as best he can. And so let me fill you in on some of the details of this story. But just the fact that this guy is in the news at all, I find particularly troubling. In most democracies, idiosyncratic personalities like Tuberville often get sort of relegated to the sidelines. They're usually ignored because they're too over the top. So I guess he would be sort of shifted over to the so-called fringe minority, and I know some people up here have some problems with that word, and okay, so you have problems with the word. But anyways, such personalities are usually the object of polite ridicule in public and often more harsh ridicule in private. But in the United States, which of course is the home to the most arcane system of political democracy ever devised or invented, guys like Tuberville can do some real damage simply because the wise folks of the state of Alabama voted him in as the United States Senator for that state. And so here he is, glorying in his 15 minutes of shame, holding up promotions to the United States military until he gets them to change their policy on reproductive rights and abortion.
The DOD cannot fund abortions, and the DOD is not funding abortions. The DOD is simply providing the ability for service members to travel to a different state from the one in which they are assigned in order to receive reproductive health care. The DOD is not paying for those abortions. They're simply saying if you cannot get the reproductive health care you need, whether that is an abortion or IVF or an IUD or whatever that is, then you should be able to travel someplace for that.
So, for the record, the United States military supports reproductive rights in terms of its membership, but Tommy doesn't think that's right, and so he's going to hold the world's largest and most powerful military hostage until he gets them to back down on that policy.
And I want to quote a Republican senator in 2022, so bear with me here. Quote, "Leaving our military in limbo is never the right thing to do," end quote. That same senator also said, quote, "Our military isn't a political pawn." The year before, this Republican senator declared, and I quote, "Our job as elected official is to make sure that those who have stepped up to defend our country have the resources that they need to do their job and to do it safely." Strangely, though, that person who said these things seems to have forgotten them, and that person, as you all know, because you've all covered this very closely, is Tommy Tuberville.
So the absurdity of all of this is really the real story here. So in the United States, military promotions require the consent of all 100 senators. Not a simple majority, not even a supermajority, but a consensus. That's what's required. All 100 senators must sign off on promotions to the United States military. These guys can't even really decide on the day of the week that it might be. And so anytime you get bipartisan cooperation in any matter, it's a big deal. And so nobody was really thinking that there was going to be a problem here until Tommy showed up and decided that he wasn't going to grant his support for promotions in the military. And so what this, there's literally thousands of promotions that are at risk here, including the replacement for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Currently that's General Mark Milley, who's retiring because he has to retire by mandate. And so the Senate has no way to appoint a new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's the highest ranking military officer in the United States of America. The United States Marine Corps does not have a functioning commandant. That's the first time in 100 years that the Marine Corps has not had a commanding officer at its helm. Again, this is something that can be directly laid at the feet of Tommy Tuberville and his ginned up protest and hostage taking, however you wish to view.
And if there's anybody that's injecting politics into this, it's Senator Tuberville, who is fundraising. He's fundraising off of his hold on the military leadership that is affecting the national security of this country. If he truly cared about this, he wouldn't be fundraising off of it.
Now, I shouldn't say, Tuberville is all by himself here. I mean, certainly he's going to be cheered on by supporters such as the Christian right, the evangelical right, the same cast of characters that all went after abortion in the first place. So they would be, I think that they would be, firm supporters of what Tuberville is doing. But nevertheless, I mean, imagine in the United States that one guy can bring the whole place to its knees. I mean, that's just absolutely ridiculous. But that's what's going on. And even in his own party, the Republicans, and as I said, Tuberville's a Republican from Alabama, other Republicans are scratching their head at this guy because, it just you're holding the entire military hostage to a whim. Well, it's not a whim. I mean, I'm sure he takes it seriously, but he's playing politics with it, and this is how he gets elected.
No, I don't support putting a hold on military nominations. I don't support that, but as to why, you need to ask Senator Tuberville.
Now, other Republicans have to get elected too, and many of them in districts where the vote can kind of go either way, that they're swing districts, or in Canada's parlance they would be known as ridings. And so, there are a lot of U.S. senators out there that are Republicans that are in tight races in general elections. And when you have the optics of a guy like a Republican, Tommy Tuberville, delaying promotions rather to the U.S. military, that kind of obstructionism kind of doesn't ring well in those swing ridings. And so there's Republicans here who are worried about, possibly losing their seats in the next election because of stuff like this. And it won't have much to do with what the legislative record is of that particular senator. People are just going to view it as, okay, he's a Republican. That's the same party as this guy who held up the military until he got what he wanted. We don't like that, so we're going to get rid of any Republican. We don't care who you put forward. If he's a Republican or she's a Republican, out you go. We're putting a Democrat in there. And so there are Republicans who are a little put off by Tuberville's efforts here because they think that that's going to reflect badly on them.
I will keep my hold. I will keep it on until the Pentagon follows the law or changes the law. It's that simple. Those are the two conditions that would get me to drop the hold.
Tuberville himself will be safe, I think. He comes from Alabama. He was just elected in 2020. He's a big Trump supporter as well, election denier, the whole list of things. His seat is probably safe. He probably doesn't care. But the fact of the matter is that there are some Republicans that do care about keeping their seats, and they might be looking at Tuberville as a risk towards them being able to do so. So imagine that you need 100% of all 100 senators to agree to something. The U.S. Senate is a place where legislation goes to die. And when you have the prospect of one senator that can hold everything up, that's, to me, is not right in a democracy. It's both sides of the fence, too. I mean, Democrat Senator Joe Manchin comes to mind. He's the guy that put the brakes on Joe Biden's anti-inflation Recovery Act. I forget the actual title of the piece of legislation, but basically it was Biden's attempt to inject new energy and new life into the U.S. economy. And because there was a lot of green-type climate associated things in that legislation, Manchin, who comes from West Virginia, which happens to be one of the biggest coal producing states in the Union, saw that was a threat to the people of his state, And so he said, not so fast, and I'm not giving you my support. And he held the whole thing up. And, and we'll go right to the wire, to the point where, the business of the United States government may actually come to a stop, and they're not able to pay their employees. In the strongest democracy in the world, they may not be able to pay their employees because the one senator from West Virginia doesn't like the climate change, the greening legislation, or the green tint of the legislation that's being put forward as the pathway to the future, not for Joe Manchin and not for the people of West Virginia. And so until that legislation was watered down after intensive negotiations with this guy, despite the fact that other Democrats almost universally hated him for it, he got what he wanted. They watered down the climate thing. And so there you go. So, if you're a believer in climate change and the harmful effects it does to the environment, well, you just suffered a significant loss because of one senator, just one out of 100, 1% of that chamber refused to give his assent to a piece of legislation. And so Tuberville's doing the same thing. And when other senators see this, then there's nothing to stop them from doing the same thing as well. So I'm going to hijack the whole process to make sure that the people in my state get something that's important to them. And not until we get it will I compromise or will I give you my cooperation. And to me, that just doesn't seem like a healthy way to run a democracy. So, what this does is it creates a body, the United States Senate, that is literally made up of 100 mini presidents. When you think of it, I mean, look at the power they have. One person can step forward and say, no, we're not going any further on this until I get A, B, C over here for my folks at home, the good folks of West Virginia or the good folks of Alabama or wherever. And until you give it to me, don't even bother me. I'm not going to move on my position. 100 mini presidents. Sometimes having one president can cause damage enough, depending on who it is, but having the potential for 100 smaller ones who let their egos go to their head and cast everything or view everything through the lens of their electability, that's one person putting their electability, their own good fortune ahead of the entire nation. And that, to me, is just not a sign of a healthy democracy. So the United States finds itself, basically, despite being the most powerful nation on earth, it finds itself in a straitjacket because they're dealing with the likes of a single United States senator voted by the good people of Alabama, and they're powerless to do anything about it. For Newsbag Redford, I'm Steve Jones.